Hey, welcome to Echoes from the Basement, an X-Files podcast. I'm your host, Alice, and each week I revisit a classic episode of The X-Files while sharing my take on the strange and mysterious adventures of Agents Scully and Mulder. And who knows, I might even make a believer out of you. Hey guys, how's it going? I'm here again with my co-host Sky, who decided to be very naughty this morning. Instead of eating her breakfast, the second I turned around, she decided to eat my husband's lunchbox with his lunch still in it. I had to send her to doggy jail for 3 minutes, and she had to think about what she did. Let's get into the episode. We are on episode 9, Space. It seems like we're watching the news. They're in Pasadena, California with NASA Mission Control Team. The news anchor states that the scientists have made a scientific history. We can see all the scientists are celebrating in the background. We see a close-up of a photo transmission of Mars from the Viking Observer spacecraft. In the photos, the news states that there has been some uproar about the photos that were captured. We see that there's signs of water located on Mars and their polar ice caps that could have sustained life. One image in particular is causing a disturbance. It is an image of a face. Well, NASA denies this. They say it's just some optical illusion. A scientist speaks out saying the face is just created by light and shadows in the pictures. We see the same photo in the scientist's apartment who spoke on the news earlier. The man is getting ready, or really unready for his day. He's doing a get unready with me grown video. He picks up the photo that has the face picture of it and goes to sleep. He's tossing and turning when he has a dream of an astronaut in space, and the astronaut is saying, "Something's out there, it's coming for me." The man wakes up from his nightmare, startled. We are then panned up to his ceiling, where something interesting starts to happen. The lights start dancing around. We see that he looks up to his ceiling, and there's this face staring back at him. It comes straight down and almost attacks him. We're now at Houston Mission Control Space Center. We're watching one of the rockets take off, and we're also witnessing the countdown. The control room has a bunch of scientists waiting as they are observing the launch. We see the same man from before who was attacked by the face. He is overseeing the launch and has a microphone in his ear. He's making sure that the rocket is working, it can take off, doing all of their checks before they can send the rocket into space. As they're doing the countdown, we see the rocket almost take off when something happens. The liftoff is aborted because of a system failure. We're in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks later, and Mulder and Scully are talking about a note Mulder received. The note says that they work for NASA and they wanted to talk from somebody from the FBI. Very mysterious. Scully says, "Why would somebody want to say anonymous? Do you think that it is a prank?" Mulder says it could be. We see a woman walk behind them. Seems like one of the scientists we saw before in the beginning scenes. She introduces herself to Scully and Mulder. Her name is Michelle Gennaro. Michelle says she flew in from Houston this morning and she works with the Space Center. She is the Mission Control Communication Commander for the Space Shuttle program, and wow, that is a mouthful. Scully asks, "Well, what brings you to Washington?" Michelle believes that there is a saboteur amongst them at the Space Center. She explains that she doesn't really have any evidence of somebody sabotaging their mission. Their mission. 2 weeks ago, she kind of just says the vibes were off. She says at least 3 seconds before liftoff, the auxiliary power unit valve malfunctioned. If the flight hadn't been aborted, the whole rocket would have blown up. She, aka Michelle, was sent something in the mail. She takes something out of a folder and it's pictures of the auxiliary power valve. it seems like it had been tampered with. We can see that there are scorch marks within it that would have caused a malfunction on the ship. Michelle goes on to explain that a person gave her the names of Scully and Mulder and said, well, you have experience in the unexplained. Can you help me? She says, how often do you see something like this done? Scully says, well, what do you mean? Michelle says the valve is made from titanium, which would make it be essentially difficult to be tampered with. You would have to have some sort of extreme heat to make these scorch marks on it. She also mentions that if anybody damaged it, it would have been detected they were preparing for takeoff. Scully asks, so you don't have any idea who sent you those photos? Michelle says, I don't know. I don't know anybody who could have sent me those photos. Mulder asks, does anyone else think there's a saboteur amongst you guys in the NASA Mission Control Center? Michelle says, if there are people that agree with me, they wouldn't be going to the FBI. She then goes on to explain that there is a launch tomorrow and that she is very concerned. Her fiancé is the shuttle commander on the mission. He's going to be in the rocket. She said, Scully and Mulder, get on it. We're at the Houston Space Center. Scully asks Mulder, why do you think somebody would want to sabotage this space shuttle? Oh my gosh, I'm having such a hard time today. Mulder replies it could be terrorists, people who oppose NASA because they spend too much money. They're also zooming in a golf cart, by the way. Futurists who say that we shouldn't use that type of rocket anymore because it is outdated and the overall design is just too old. We also have people who accuse our government of space sabotage because of the failure of the Mars Observer in the Hubble telescope. These are both connected to alien conspiracies. NASA seems like they have a list of enemies. I wonder who tampered with the part. Scully and Mulder are going to meet Colonel Marcus Belt. I hope I said his name right. But for now, we're going to call him Colonel Belt. He actually almost died on one of the missions, Mulder mentions. We then see a clock ticking away on the wall. There's 10 hours till the next takeoff. Colonel Belt is the shuttle program director. Him, Scully, and Mulder get to talking. They introduce themselves as FBI agents and that Mulder is a big fan of Colonel Belt. Get this, Colonel Belt is the man we saw earlier on in the episode, the man who had the face on the ceiling. He is clearly connected to these events in some way or another. Scully then proceeds to take out the photo of the tampered valve and hands it to Colonel Belt. She says, do you recognize this? Colonel Belt takes a look at the photos and says, yep, that's the valve we have on the ship. Scully says, do you think that with tampering with this device, someone is trying to sabotage the space program? Colonel Belt says, no, I don't believe that at all. Scully replies, do you have any reason to suspect sabotage at all? Belt says, no, and if you're going to make these accusations, Scully, about this program, these people, you better be very careful. Scully says, well, because of this evidence, aka referring to the photo, would you consider postponing today's shuttle flight so we can investigate? Colonel Belt goes on to say, no, we have been waiting 2 weeks for this launch, and we have taken all the necessary precautions. Why would we stop it now? Scully asks, well, has there been an internal investigation ever done because of a matter such as this? Colonel Belt says this device has been handcrafted by the best scientists in the whole wide world, and it would be impossible to be tampered with. Everyone in this facility wants to see the shuttle take off and come back. Why would somebody want to tamper with the parts? We can kind of see Mulder is starting to doubt Colonel Belt. We see it on his face. I guess it's a case of never meet your heroes. Mulder asks Colonel Belt, can we watch liftoff from Mission Control? Belt says, sure. Seems like Mulder has some sort of a plan. Mulder and Scully leave Colonel Belt's office. They meet with another scientist that's working on the rocket. He asks Scully, where did you get this photo? He says this is a APU valve, but something doesn't make sense in the photo. He goes on to explain that it is made from titanium. Mulder then asks the scientists, why didn't you order a material analysis of this part, especially that you see it has been tampered with? The scientist replies, I've never seen this photo before, so I'm not really too sure. Mulder says, wouldn't you order an analysis anyway because it's a malfunctioning part? The scientist says, well, we put this part in all of the rockets and they fly pretty well. We have no problem. And because of this, if a part did malfunction, it would be too costly and time consuming. Even doing the analysis would have taken a long time. We want to keep on schedule. Scully asks, well, aren't you guys just pushing the schedule ahead without taking any safety precautions? Which, in my case, I believe is a reasonable answer. The scientist says, well, anything could go wrong with the shuttle, but we have people here that can fix them. See that? He's pointed to the clock. In the next 8 hours, we're going to take off again. The scientist also goes on to say that the safety decision is up to Colonel Belt. At the end of the day, he has the last say in everything. Colonel Belt, speaking of him, is watching Scully and Mulder from above. Scully then asks Mulder, what do you think? Mulder says, I can't believe how much faith we put into machines, which is so true. Scully also asks him, do you think that Colonel Belt is hiding something? Mulder, he wants to defend his hero, says, Colonel Belt would never endanger the lives of these astronauts. Well, at least knowingly endanger their lives. He was an astronaut himself. We then see the shuttle is preparing for takeoff. Michelle is doing her job while Scully and Mulder watch. The scientists are all preparing for the shuttle to take off and making sure that everything works. They're going over their checklists, they're just preparing and making sure that everything is good for liftoff. The rocket starts to take off and the countdown starts. We see that the shuttle lifts off and then goes into the air. Colonel Belt and everyone are super excited and happy. Scully and Mulder are now at their hotel. They're discussing how awesome watching the rocket take off was. Scully says, yeah, I don't know, it was kind of mid. Michelle runs behind them and calls for Mulder. So she just spawns out of nowhere. She says, hold up, wait, something has gone wrong. Something is wrong with the shuttle. I just recently received a phone call from communications that the shuttle has gone down. We have to get back to Houston right now. Wow, anxiety inducing. Scully and Mulder are driving back to the space center and they are starting to hear static on the radio. They are actually following Michelle in her car, so just keep that in mind. Mulder says that NASA has issued a press blackout so that the media doesn't know about the rocket. That explains why there's just static on the radio. Scully asks, do you think this is some sort of sabotage? Mulder says, I don't know. Things go wrong all the time on spaceship. Scully replies, yeah, but they usually seem like the scientists can fix it. Scully and Mulder are following Michelle this whole time when it starts to downpour rain. Kind of like how it is outside now. Michelle is having a hard time seeing out her window, her front window. All of a sudden, we start to hear some strange noises, and then a face appears out of nowhere and tries to attack her. The same face Colonel Belt saw on his ceiling. Michelle takes her hands off the wheel and crashes. Mulder and Scully run out of their car to check on Michelle. Her car has flipped and she is stuck. She can't get out. She's trapped in her car upside down. Michelle is injured but alive. She also mentions she has to get back to Houston, which is, wow, you are dedicated to your job, ma'am. Mulder asks, what happened? Why did your car flip? After he had saved her. She says, something came at me in the fog, and next thing I knew, I was upside down. It wasn't an animal. It looked like a face. Interesting. We're back at Houston Space Center. The scientists are starting to freak out. There's static all over their screens. They're trying to get in touch with the astronauts, but they can't. They can't establish any form of communication with them. Michelle, Scully, and Mulder arrive. Michelle asks what's happening. Basically, we get the rundown from the scientists that the rocket is all messed up. Anything that could go wrong went wrong. Michelle asks, where are they? The scientists say they're over Eastern Africa. Michelle says, try patching them through. We need to speak to them now. Well, one of the scientists say a part is broken on the ship and the astronauts cannot rotate the shuttle. Scully and Mulder were the whistleblowers, and nobody wanted to listen. Essentially, the astronauts need to rotate the shuttle away from the sun or else they'll be cooked. Colonel Belt is nowhere in sight. And then on top of all this, the astronauts' backup system failed. This other scientist explains to Michelle someone is messing with their communication from their end. Mission control. Michelle says, "Can you trace it?" The scientist said it would have to be in the data banks that's located in the upstairs office area. Mulder and Scully says, "We got it. We're gonna go look for it." They all, Michelle, Scully, and Mulder, run up to this office area, and Scully and Mulder have their guns drawn. The team starts to look around and investigate, but the power turns off for a second and then comes back on. Mulder spots another scientist hiding in the corner. That's not creepy at all. Mulder says, "I'm a federal agent. Come out of there." He asks, "What are you doing in here?" The scientist says, "I work here." Michelle says, "Let me see your clearance," because why is this scientist hiding in the corner in the dark? Michelle looks at his badge. I guess everything's cool. Mulder asks if he has seen anyone else in here. The scientist says no, but then the lights start to flicker. Mulder says, "Call security. I don't want anybody coming in or out of this building without proper clearance." Colonel Bell has arrived. Finally, the scientists are kind of filling him in on the situation that's happening. Michelle informs him someone or something is jamming their transmissions to the astronauts. Colonel Belt says, "We have to help these astronauts." I have an idea, but Michelle says, "I don't know about that idea, it might not work." Colonel Belt says, "We have to give the astronauts control of the ship." Michelle says, "We have to bring them down." Colonel Belt says that they have to rotate the ship, while Michelle says that they can't, and if they try to, these astronauts are going to be stranded in space. They'll live on a ghost ship. Mulder informs Scully that the astronauts will be flying the ships by themselves. What I said was basically a simpler version of what Michelle and Colonel Bell talked about. They talked about it in space terms. Michelle speaks to the astronauts, explaining that they will have to fly the ships by themselves. Scully asks, "What just happened?" Mulder says they cut contact with the shuttle. We see 2 hours on the clock now. The astronauts are flying solo. Everybody is just patiently waiting. No contact, no nothing from the astronauts. Michelle says it's been 45 seconds. If we don't come up with something else, they're doomed. And the astronauts would have executed this plan to rotate the shuttle if they could. We would have heard back from them by now. It's 60 seconds. Colonel Bell says, "Establish communication again, patch us through." There's static on the TV screens. Michelle asks the astronauts if they copy and, where are they? The astronauts reply with, "We did it. We got the ship to fly right." Everybody cheers. There is a wave of relief. Finally, I could never imagine being in that situation. Colonel Bell talks to the astronauts and asks about the crew and that they need to get some rest. He also tells the scientists that are in mission control, "Let's get to work and fix all these issues." Colonel Belt then proceeds to go to the restroom where he washes his face and kind of cools down. He starts to look weirdly deeply into his reflection. I wonder why. We see a Scully, Mulder, and Michelle watching a press conference. Colonel Belt is speaking to the press. Scully asks Mulder, how did he know that his plan was going to work? Michelle replies before Mulder and says he didn't. They could have been stranded up there in orbit. Scully asks why would Colonel Bell risk it if he knew the astronauts' lives could be in danger. Michelle says if he didn't deliver the payload, it would have been $1 million wasted. At the end of the day, everything comes down to money. Also, if the payload did not get delivered, Congress would have shut down NASA. Colonel Belt speaks about the crew, talks about the ship, and how the rocket went on without no problems. Mulder is clearly upset. He met his hero, but his hero is a liar. Colonel Belt leaves and Mulder runs after him. Belt states, "You want to know why I lied, don't you? You think I would lie to you too, since I lied to the press." He states that every time you go onto a spaceship, you risk your life for the advancement of mankind. Mulder replies with, "Well, you're a true American hero. Those astronauts are American heroes." Colonel Bell says, yeah, alright, heroes. We are yesterday's news. We really only make the paper if something bad happens. Which is kind of true, because if it bleeds, it leads. Mulder asks Colonel Bell, do you think somebody is sabotaging the shuttle? Colonel Bell says, my answer is just to bring those men back safely to Earth. We never really hear a direct yes or no from Colonel Bell. It's clear that he's hiding something. In the end, Mulder and Colonel Belt go their separate ways that night. We're in Colonel Belt's apartment. He enters. He's starting to wind down for the night. He drinks some hard liquor to take the edge off. He's starting to get ready for bed. Belt closes his eyes and replays the scene where an astronaut is up in space saying something is out there. We then see his face transform into a hideous other face completely. It looks just like the pictures we saw at the beginning. His face then goes back to normal and changes again. It's safe to say something is possessing Colonel Bell. We then see something float up from his body, a ghost of some sort, and fly out his window. Colonel Bell is shooketh and confused, and he tries to reach out for the ghost. We, as the audience, have the perspective of the ghost. We're soaring around, and then we look at Colonel Bell. Then we see the human-sized ghost whoosh away into the night. We then see a ship flying into space. The astronauts say that something has hit their spaceship to ground control. They heard a loud thud. The astronauts are starting to panic. We then hear the astronauts call to ground control, and we hear the thump over the radio. A scientist runs up the stairs to tell Michelle that there is an oxygen leak in the astronaut's ship, called the orbiter. Michelle asks what happened. The scientist says it was some sort of thump and now their oxygen is leaking. Another scientist says someone has seen a gaseous cloud in the line of orbit. Mulder tells Scully that is CO2 leaking out from space. That's the cloud somebody spotted. Weirdly enough, the exact same thing happened to Colonel Belt while he was on his mission, because Colonel Belt was previously an astronaut. Michelle says, somebody needs to find Colonel Belt and I need some answers, but they can't find him. Michelle tells the other scientists, I want to know the worst case scenario, and somebody needs to find Colonel Belt. Mulder volunteers, and he says, well, we can find him. One scientist says to Michelle, the astronauts only have 30 minutes of backup oxygen. Scully asks, why does Michelle need Belt? Mulder replies with, she doesn't know how bad the oxygen leak is. She needs Colonel Belt because he's been in this exact situation before. He will know what to do. This is all coming from Mulder. He's explaining it. We're back at Colonel Belt's apartment. Scully and Mulder are knocking on the door, but there's no answer. Colonel Belt eventually answers the door. He's a mess. Mulder asks, are you alright, sir? And they need you back at Mission Control. There was another accident. Scully, Mulder, and now Colonel Belt go back to Mission Control. Colonel Belt asks Michelle how bad the leak is. Michelle says, we don't have any way to determine it. We don't know. Colonel Belt radios to the astronauts, what's your condensation in the cabin? And the astronauts reply with, the windows are steamy. Colonel Belt says, get in your spacesuits and depressurize the cabin. Then vent the CO2. Also, stay in your suits and be prepared to use your emergency oxygen system. And then Colonel Belt says, deliver your payload. Michelle says, those are men up there. Colonel Belt says, I've done this before and I know what to do. Don't question me. If you can't do your job, then you should just let somebody else do it, especially if you can't handle the pressure. That's an insanely jerk move, but okay. Michelle leaves crying and Scully goes after her. Michelle, Scully, and Mueller are all talking, and Michelle says those men are gonna die up there. Mulder says, you don't know that. Michelle says, they're putting the payload and money before the lives of these men. Scully explains that she feels that Colonel Belt is losing it. Somebody else needs to be in charge. Mulder says, well, he just saved the astronauts' lives earlier. Scully says, or really, did he actually put their lives at stake for no reason? Scully said, if that ship doesn't come back, Congress is going to kill the NASA program. Mulder says, well, don't you think killing those astronauts are going to do the same? Scully has come up with a theory. She believes that someone has sabotaged the shuttle and Colonel Belt has knew about it all along. Michelle says we have to stop Colonel Belt. Mulder says in good faith that he does not want those men to die, referring to Colonel Belt. He is the only person that knows how to get them down. How do we know that Colonel Belt won't save the astronauts' lives, which is a huge thing to gamble on? Mulder says, I need all your info and everything that you have done here at NASA. Mulder says, we're going to look for anything that states that Colonel Belt knew about this sabotage. Scully and Mulder go through binders and binders of info. The astronauts then say something is outside their ship. There's some kind of ghost on their ship. Colonel Belt screams, no, no, no. He's starting to panic. Scully finds the same diagram sent to Michelle that was ordered by Colonel Belt. This is proof that Colonel Belt knew about the faulty valve. Mulder says this is from the Challenger from 1986. Scully says, do you think he knew about the belt too? Mulder says something weird is happening here. Michelle runs in and says, Colonel Belt has collapsed. He's in his office. We are transported into Colonel Belt's office. Scully and Mulder find help me written on Belt's desk. They then find him huddled and scared underneath it. Colonel Belt is whimpering. Mulder says, get a doctor. The colonel is saying, help me, help me. The paramedics come in and take Colonel Belt. Michelle says, I'm bringing the shuttle down. Colonel Belt screams, no, it's out there. Mulder says, he's trying to tell us something. I want you to focus, Colonel. Focus on my finger. Take your pain and your anxiety and put it here in my finger. Colonel Belt keeps saying, spacesuit, spacesuit. Scully says, Mulder, you're risking his health. Mulder says, focus, Colonel Belt. You're going to save those astronauts and you're going to tell me how to do it. Colonel Belt says that the shuttle cannot survive re-entry because of the damaged part. Belt then admits he is responsible for the damage. Mulder asks him, did he sabotage this shuttle? Belt says, no, I couldn't stop them. Nobody can stop them. So Colonel Belt is saying that he takes responsibility for the damage, but it wasn't actually him. Mulder says, who? Who are you talking about? Who's them? Belt says they don't want us to know. Mulder says, who? Belt says that they came to me and they lived in me. We then get a glimpse of Belt in his spacesuit. He is the astronaut in these visions. We see that somebody is coming towards him or something is coming towards him. A ghost face is screaming at him. He's saying, get me out of here. Belt says while he's on the stretcher, help me, it's coming back. His face starts to distort again into that ghastly other face. Michelle says, that's the face I saw in the fog. The paramedic says, we're losing Colonel Belt. Another scientist comes in and says the astronauts only have 30 minutes of oxygen left. Michelle says, I have no choice but to bring them down. Michelle takes charge now. She has decided the shuttle is coming down to Earth. She tells the astronauts to prepare for re-entry. Mulder asks Belt if there's any way they can save the shuttle. Belt says, change the directory to re-entry to 35 degrees. Mulder tells Michelle this. She says she can't. She can't do it. But then she does. She tells the astronauts to change the trajectory by 35 degrees. At that point, they lost communication with the astronauts. They do not know if Michelle's message got to them. All the scientists wait. 16 minutes of oxygen left on the ship. The shuttle is then picked up on radar in Hawaii, but not in Albuquerque where they need to land the shuttle. Michelle is saying, can you hear me? Can you hear me? The astronauts say it's a nice day in Albuquerque. We see that their ship has landed. Michelle is now in a press meeting speaking about the shuttle. Belt is watching this press conference from his hospital bed. His face starts to change again. The ghost lifts from his body, but he tries to fight it. Belt, trigger warning, runs out his window and falls to his death. We see a flashback of his time in space. Mulder is reading the paper that mentions Belt's death. Mulder tells Scully something has possessed him, referring to Colonel Belt, and it possessed him while he was in space. Scully replies with, the doctor said that Colonel Belt was experiencing dementia. Mulder says, I'm not sure if Colonel Belt knew that he was responsible for his own actions. He was the one that sent those photos to Michelle without even knowing why. His impulse was to save those men. Scully, on the other hand, says that Colonel Belt tried to kill those astronauts. Mulder says whatever it was, Colonel Bell took it with him. Scully says that there was no foul play discovered in the investigation. Trigger warning again. Mulder says Colonel Bell was prepared to take his own life to stop whatever was possessing him. Now it is confirmed that Colonel Bell was possessed this whole time and was unsure whether or not he knew about his own actions. We're at Colonel Belt's funeral. Scully and Mulder are at this service. Michelle is also there. They all look at each other while they say goodbye to Colonel Belt for one last time. Let's get into the commentary. This episode was just okay to me, maybe because I'm not interested in space to begin with. I feel like there wasn't enough scary or paranormal stuff happening, and there wasn't a lot of Scully and Mulder action either. Compared to the last episode, it just seemed like it was lackluster. It wasn't scary, there wasn't a lot of action. But what do you guys think of the episode? Did it need more thrill, or was it just alright? But thanks for listening, all you truth seekers and abductees and X-Files enthusiasts. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the show. And remember, the truth is out there. You just have to find it.